Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming, and you're all very welcome. And I hope you've all had some refreshments at this point. Today, we are pleased to present, Mr. Frederick L. Ames, who is going to present to us his history of the three Freds, which includes F.L. Ames, who was his great-grandfather and who has a portrait. The mic isn't working.
Turn it up.
That's okay.
No. Turn it up now.
It is now? You got it? Okay. Edit that part. So, the three Freds, which the fourth Fred, who's here with us today, has authored and researched and has presented, initially presented it at Stonehill in 2016. So we are very pleased and lucky to have him here today. In case you don't know, Fred is the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Oaks Ames Memorial Hall, and along with his two brothers, David and Bill. David, who's active here at the Historical Society, Bill, who's active at the library, and somewhere Bill is in the, oh, there he is, hiding in the audience, trying to avoid being noticed.
Hiding behind Joe.
There you go. Well, it's better looking at Joan. Fred recently donated to us a portrait of his great-grandfather, Frederick L. Ames, which you can see a little later on over on the men's side, and it's immediately on the wall, the opposite side above the post office boxes. It's a very striking portrait. And if you are walking out in the lobby there, you can also see a photograph of F.L. Ames, which is on the wall immediately above the table where you signed in. Fred is the sixth generation of his family to live here in Easton, and he's our neighbor over on Pond Street. Excuse me. And, the presentation today is also contained in Reminiscences, Volume 9, 2018. So if you miss anything today and you want to catch up on it, there are some Volume 9s out there on the display case. In addition to that, Fred's first cousin, once removed, Freddie Ames, who was killed in a plane crash in the Blue Hills and resided at Stonehill. There's also another article about the Blue Ghost, which is in Volume 13 of Reminiscences. So, without further ado, and in order to get a couple of announcements in, I think I'm going to have to turn this over to John.
He has to.
I was told that I have absolutely no choice. So, without further ado, Fred, thank you for being here today, and I'm sure I, as well as everybody else, are looking forward to hearing your presentation today. And I'll now give it to John.
How are you? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Coe, Director and VP here, and welcome everybody today. I do thank Fred for coming today. I missed his presentation at Stonehill. He did this about 5 years ago, I think. The four Freds, and I saw it on ECAT. It was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is this for the ECAT?
For ECAT, yeah.
It's not for ECAT. Okay, it's not for ECAT. No. You can relax now. It's okay. And so a couple things I want to talk about. He did give us that great portrait of Frederick Lothrop Ames. Frederick Lothrop built Langwater, the big mansion over here in Langwater. And probably a lot of us remember the pond. We called it either Langwater or Fred's. Fred's, that was a great name. And his son, F. Lothrop Ames, we talk about, you know, that Stonehouse Hill House, and that whole place over there. His son, Freddie, great pilot, had a mishap and went down. Fred, not Freddie, not Frederick, but Fred. I guess you didn't want to be called Freddie. That's part of your thing. They didn't want that to happen.
Only the girls could call
Only
him
the
Fred.
girls. Yeah. Wonderful. But anyway, in the other room, you'll see the portrait but we have positioned the sons of Frederick Lothrop Ames in their mansions where you see Oliver with sheep pasture. All right, you see Fred or Junior or the second at Stonehill, his Stonehouse Hill house. Then you'll see his house, which is Langwater, but John lived there after Frederick Lothrop I passes. But then you also have Wayside, that's Mary Ames Frothingham. That was a daughter. And Helen was another daughter, but she moved out of town. So you'll see some of the mansions back there that we have positioned so you can see it. A lot of help from Paul Berry. Paul is one of our ex-curator, fabulous. He's finding pictures all over the place and from the family and anything in Easton. That's the man you could talk to. He would get it right like that. So thank you. A couple shameless plugs for the museum. By the way, Frederick Lothrop Ames bought this place, gave it to the Old Colony Railroad. Did you know that? That's why one of the dedications of this place was. So he was the president of the railroad company at the time, and he needed the railroad, so he bought it and gave it to them. So fabulous, just loving it. But you're going to see over there some nice prints. Also, we've got some new renovations here and some revisions. You've seen the up here on the right, the Pilgrims. They say Pilgrims in Exile. And if you haven't seen this or heard about this below it says Class of '01. Oliver Ames High School was dedicated in 1895. This is the class of 1896, the very first graduating class at Oliver Ames. Bought that print, gave it to the high school, the yellow school. That was the first Oliver Ames High School. I'll give a lot of credit to Leon Lombardi, one of our directors. He found it up there after Doug King took over the place. Said we could have that and brought it here. But the other one we just had restored. Ken took it down to West Side Graphics. That one is Pilgrim Wedding Procession, and it shows a young bride going to her wedding on an oxen. And just beautiful, brought it back to life from the class of '01, and that is 1901. So again, a beautiful, beautiful piece right there. We just put up here the other day, I had Ken Michael on the, he was on the stepladder up there, and I kept pushing him to put it up there, and he did a nice job hanging that. Anybody have an idea who that is?
Yeah, J.O. Dean.
J.O. Dean.
I found out.
You're close. You're close. You got the same last name, but that is the Reverend Paul Dean.
Paul Dean, yeah, not the oil company.
J.O. was close. Paul Dean was the gentleman that the Masonic Lodge, the first Masonic Lodge, on the top of the 3rd floor of the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall is. He was a selectman for 5 years. He was a reverend in town for 5 years. When you read Chapin's book, there's a couple sections in there. Paul Dean was a beloved man in Easton. They loved this guy. So they named it after him. I positioned it next to Dr. Cogswell, who was the first Grand Master of the lodge. So you got the names of the lodge, the first Grand Master. They both kind of work really, really well. So I want you to go around after Fred talks. We've got a lot of new revisions. J.E. Goss, Easton, we found that. Anybody know who J.E. Goss was?
Jenny Goss?
What did he do? Where did that come from?
Oh, he had the wagons that he also had delivery service.
Exactly, buses. He had that came off the front of his bus. He bussed a lot of school kids around. J.E. Goss, they had, I don't know, 9 buses, and that came off the front. And you would have a lot of them with, you'll see it in the foyer area, another J.E. Goss with number 2. So the number 2 bus, the number 7 bus, the number 10 bus. So kind of historic here. So, but thank you for coming. And would you kind of show what we have? I'm making another little pitch for our snow hats. We have our Easton Historical Society snow hats. They're only $20. Nice donation for the Historical Society. And on the back, it says 1725. That's kind of a really good one.
300 years.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vanna White.
Come on, let's put, no, okay, all right. So, without further ado, Mr. Ames, come on down. Yep.
Hello.
Eat some cheese.
Do I need to use this?
You really don't. It's not for you, that's just for the...
Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much. You took some of my lines, but that's okay.
Just remember,
I can't take any more.
No, yes you did. And I've known Jonathan since we were like 8 years old. Yeah, because our parents were great friends. So, and I remember your mother fondly, she was great. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about Fred, the first Fred, and again, he was the one who paid for this station and gave it. He was also in the board of directors of about 50 or 60 railroads, so he was very much involved in railroads, including the Union Pacific Railroad. So how do I start out? I'm going to use this for notes. I'm going to try to be as extemporaneous as possible because nothing's more boring than somebody reading something to you. You know, I'm not a great public speaker, so I'm going to try very hard not to start reading. Again, I'm the fourth of the name. As it says in the book, I came home from the hospital without a name. They hadn't decided on it yet. Then I was called Tom. And my older brothers, David and Bill, who some of you know, they objected strongly to it, but David now has a son named Tom, so And so what clinched the deal was that there was another Ames, an Oaks relation, and she had just had a son and she called Thomas, and so she called up my mother and she said, sorry, Tom's taken. That's how it worked, I guess, back then. And it was ironic because Winthrop Ames had written a book, an Oaks Ames relation, the guy that lived in Quessett House, What Shall We Name the Baby? So anyway, but Mrs. Frothingham, Aunt Minnie, came to the rescue, and Hazel was witness to this, and she told me that I was to be named after her father, who was the first Fred, and not Freddie, the Playboy adventurer. So, I think anyway, I wish I'd met him. He sounded like a lot of fun. But okay, well, I will start with Fred, who again was 1835. His mother was a Lothrop, which is, you know, a known Easton family. And his uncle was minister to Russia under Grover Cleveland. And we have a lot of Lothrops that going around. But anyway, okay, I'm skipping over some things here. And he had a sister who died the next year, Helen Anger. And there's a church, there's a very nice stained glass window in the church done by Lafarge, and that's in her memory. And she evidently was well known for sort of, you know, going around helping people, giving money to the poor and this and that, very beloved. And that's called the Angel of Help. So I finally put those two things together, that's why it's called that. And that was done, you know, I have so many stories I can go down, so I'll try to keep it short, by Lafarge. And Fred was a big patron of Lafarge, stained glass windows. And when he was working on that window, Lafarge, he took a break and he went to Japan. And Fred was just hounding him, when are you going to pay? When are you going to pay? Or get this work done? And he wrote to a friend of his, you know, trying to finish the Angel of Help window in Northeastern. And he wrote, those Ameses, what bloodsuckers. So anyway, that's one of the nice stories. So Fred was smart. He went to, what did he do? He went to, he sort of prepped at Exeter, you know, Phillips Exeter, then he went to Harvard. He entered as a sophomore, and he graduated, so he was a pretty young graduate of Harvard. And I remember when my Uncle Oliver, who lived over in Fred's house, he said what did he say to me? He said, you know, when I was entering college as a freshman, I thought, I'm starting college at the same age that my grandfather graduated. So he was, he was very successful too. I think maybe he felt a little competition with Fred. Didn't quite catch up to him, but you know, he did very well. And so he was married, Fred. Oh yeah, this is a great one. After college, he wrote for the class reunion. This was like 2 or 3 years out, and he writes to the class agent. He writes, "I am out here in business with my father, out here is here. Got no office, no wife, no children, and don't want any." Well, that's sort of interesting because a few years later, he had built Langwater. Then he got married after that. And he was the treasurer or something of the shovel company, and all the things he didn't want, it's like life, isn't it? All the things he didn't want happened. So he married Rebecca Caroline Blair, and that's the Sally Blair Athletic Complex. That's where that name comes from. But what's very interesting, and I just found out from my cousin Minnie, was that Sally Blair Ames had a pretty traumatic childhood, because I guess virtually all her family died, of heart attacks, of accidents, or this or that. So she was adopted by the Shreves, and they were in Louisiana, and she was sort of raised by the Shreves, and that's where the name comes from, Mary Shreve Ames and all that, but her real name was Blair. So anyway, how did Fred and Rebecca meet? They met through, it was Fred's younger sister went to school in Boston with Rebecca. And isn't that one of the classic ways, right, where you get introduced, a friend of your sister's and all that? And she was, so it makes sense because his sister was just 1 year younger than him. So that's how they met each other. And then there were several children. There was Henry Shreve, who was called Little Henry. And again, Shreve comes in right there in the first name. And he was called Little Henry, and unfortunately when he was 7 months old, he died. So they went on to have Helen Ainger, and then Oliver III, he was sheep pasture, and then Mary Shreve, again, the Shreve again, and she's Aunt Minnie, who built the town offices. And then there was Lothrop, as you were saying, Stonehill, and then John Stanley, or Jack, who's my grandfather. He lived his entire life at Langwater, and he died there in 1959 on the 100th anniversary of the house being built. Excuse me. And my father was the last Ames to be born there, and that was in 1912, in January. And I sort of wonder, why would they had a house in Boston, so in Mass General Hospital, right? But for some reason, they decided he was born out there. So I digress. Fred got interested in horticulture, and he went at Harvard. There was a professor he had named Asa Gray, who was very famous. People would come from miles around to see him, and I think that's where he first got interested in that. And he had a good friend named Charles Sprague Sargent, and he was the one who founded the Arnold Arboretum and was director of it for 54 years. And Fred was a generous supporter of the Arnold Arboretum, as was my grandfather. And out here in the greenhouses, I find this hard to believe, but it really is true. He, what does it say? I'm going to read it, sorry. His collection was the most complete in the country and probably was unsurpassed in the world. Gathered from every source, there were 8,000 plants and 1,700 varieties. Wow. And he had an orchid collection, which was second only to Jay Gould's, who was the famous railroad financier, ironically a business partner of his at times. So he was very, very interested in horticulture, and someone said he would probably have liked to be best remembered as devoted to horticulture. And the greenhouses, one year he spent over just about $30,000. And in those days, 1880s, that was $1 million on the greenhouse. And that was probably an irregular year, bought a lot of plants, but I think just about every year he was spending $10,000 to $15,000, so around $500,000 or so a year on the greenhouses. And Professor Oakes lived next door, the horticulturalist, the guy with the orchids, and so this is where he got it. Went over, saw the greenhouses and Fred's orchids, and I'm sure that inspired him. And there's an orchid species, Amesianus, and it's named after both of them, Oakes and Fred. So that was a big part of when I was a kid, I'd go through the greenhouses, and it was really quite fascinating. And they had these orchids that Grandpa bought from Japan, and they're now in the National Gallery down in Washington DC, whatever, and you can see them. They bring them out in March in this beautiful rotunda with a marble, and they're quite a big deal. I mean, they're owned by the government now. And there would be the parties when they bloomed every spring at the greenhouse, and everybody was in suits, and they had the maids were in their uniform with silver tray and chilled martinis. You could see the condensation running down the sides of the glass. I remember that image very clearly. And I got to see one of the last of those ones before my grandmother died, and it was really quite something. The life back then is just. I got a taste of it, but it was just incredible. I mean, here was this incredible setup. Fred was also a founder of the Trustees of Reservations. In 1891, it was incorporated in his Boston office. So he was very much involved, that as well. Now, he's also a he was an art collector. He had a couple of Rembrandts and some other very nice paintings, which if you read the article, he had a painter by just about every different school of art. And those are now at the Museum of Fine Arts. And there's another one by a man named Troyon, who was I think Aunt Minnie gave it to the museum. But anyway, there's a photo of him in his Boston house in the dining room where he would sit. What he would see in the opposite wall were his Rembrandts and the Troyon, and then off to the side he had a very nice, it's on Commonwealth Avenue, a very nice sort of greenhouse that stuck out on towards the street. So I just figured that had to be his seat, the one that would look at those. But anyway, and of course he's best known for his relationship with H.H. Richardson. And I was asked how he met Richardson. And again, it was his Fred's good friend, Charles Sprague Sargent, the guy with the Arboretum, was a neighbor of Richardson's in Brookline. And I'm sure that's how they met, was socially that way. And Richardson had this great circle of intellectuals and architects and all that. And Fred was interested in all that stuff. And so, he was just incredibly talented in business, in art, horticulture. He was really, could do just about anything. And again, we know about Richardson, and he did 12 works for the Ames family, mostly for Fred. And he did the Ames building in Boston. And there's, again, this very building, and that's the line you stole from me, is he paid for this, and again, he was involved with 50 railroads. So he was a real expert on railroads. So, and the other thing, it's sort of tough in a way to talk about him, because it's just sort of a list of all these accomplishments going down, and I try to find I'll try to weave in some interesting stories, because I do know some. But anyway, and also Richardson did the Ames Monument out in Wyoming. Bill's been out there, I've been out there. And it's a pyramid, and he took Richardson went out to see it in his private railroad car. Fred, of course, if you're involved with 50 railroads, you gotta have your own private railroad car. So Richardson went out there, looked at it, liked it, and my cousin Heidi, she remembers in the mid-1940s, that our grandparents invited them to have lunch in the private railroad car. And she went there, and I said, well, how was it? She said, well, there was a white-coated waiter and everything, and she said the food was rather good. So I think what they did, they had a house in Florida, and they got there because the person in the next house, which was the corner of Arlington and Commonwealth, wanted to start a social resort. And so I guess they would get on the private railroad car, go down to New York, switch engines, and then go down to the house in Florida, which was very nice. And also they'd use it when they go to hunts, down in Virginia or places like that. And they'd attach a car which had the horses, then another car would have the baggage. And they'd all stream down to go hunting. So this was in the period just prior to World War I, sort of like Downton Abbey, right? Just up to World War I. And anyway, there's the Gate Lodge, we all know that. But I want to talk about 306 Dartmouth. And that really was Fred's tour de force. It said that he didn't want to move to Boston until he had the biggest house in the city. And he did. And it was funny when the governor later, they were good friends, but they were also kind of friendly rivals. And evidently the story is the architect asked him, well, Mr. Ames, what sort of house do you want? What style is that? How big, whatever. Oh, he said, I don't care, just make it bigger than Fred's. And he did. But not nearly as nice. But anyway, Fred's had 50 rooms. It was 2,600 square feet, 25 fireplaces. And it had 6 Lafarge windows. And the same person that painted the painting in that room, he also did a very good, what would you call it, mural at the top of the 35-foot high stairwell. It's a fabulous building. It was bought a few years ago by a Saudi sheikh who put $35 million into it to fix it up. Did an excellent job inside and out. And now you can get a condo there. There's 3 of them now. And you've got $25 million. You've got yourself a cozy little place to stay in. But yes, so again, I think Fred's favorite number was number 1. You know, he had the Union Pacific stock number 1. He had the biggest house in town. He had the tallest building, the Ames building. And his portrait was painted by Benjamin Constant, who painted the Pope and the Queen. So number 1 was his favorite number. So, but anyway, he spared no expense, again, with the 306 Dartmouth, and I hope to go in there and see it, because I made friends with the architect that's doing the restoration. And I remember once in my younger days, I sort of decided to go in and see it, so I knocked on the door, and I went in, and they said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Fred Ames. I've just come to check up on the place. That's great. And the guy thought it was so funny. He said, all right, I'll give you a tour. And showed around. But it's really good that was saved. And they did a lot of good work on the preservation. You know, there was leather wallpaper and all that. It's just a beautiful house. And the sheikh spent a lot of money getting all that stuff restored, which is nice. So that was a very good save. Now, he was also, in his business career, and I'm sort of weak on that, because he did so many things. He really was, he had the brain for business. He was called a great Gilded Age capitalist. And he really was. He dealt with the likes of Jay Gould, Sidney Dillon, J.P. Morgan, Russell Sage, Thomas Edison. One of the things I'd like to do actually with my family is get a list of all the people like Winthrop Ames and all the theater greats and actors he knew, and Fred and all the people like J.P. Morgan he did business with, and just sort of list all of them that they knew, all these different Ameses over the years, and the people they came in contact with. So with General Electric, there was a committee with Fred, J.P. Morgan, and 3 others. And that was a merger of it was the merger of Edison Electric, so he knew Thomas Edison, and Thompson Houston Electric of Lynn, where Fred was a big shareholder. But Fred, J.P. Morgan, and the 3 others, they sat down and they were the ones that crafted this merger. So he was involved right at the very pinnacle of this Gilded Age. And if you ever read up on Jay Gould, it's fascinating. He was the most hated man in America on Wall Street, but he was hated because he was smarter than everybody else. And Fred was his partner for many years, and his father Oliver was too, through the railroads. Fred and Jay Gould had the controlling interest of the Union Pacific Railroad. I think Fred had the most shares, but Jay Gould had enough to put them over 50%. And we have a copy of a telegram where Jay Gould asked Fred, should we form a coast-to-coast railroad? Now, you know, the quote-unquote transcontinental started in Nebraska and went to it wasn't coast-to-coast. So Gould wanted to put together a coast-to-coast railroad, and he said to Fred, I thought this was a great compliment, I will do if you approve. And Fred decided, no, let's not do it. And so we have not much communication with him. We do have that telegram. And as railroads got to be, you know, as the years went on, and it was just, to his mind, it was less of a good investment than it used to be. He got into real estate, and of course became the largest holder of real estate in the city of Boston. And he had, well, that's Fred. he's got to be number one, right? So he became the largest owner of real estate in Boston. And he also had plans over in Cambridge. It was a development for 25 blocks of real estate he was going to develop, not 25 buildings, but 25 blocks of buildings. And it was going to be sort of opposite on the river, Charles River from Back Bay. And well, what happened was Fred died. It was 1893. There was a big crash. There was a big railroad crisis, and I've got to read up more on that. And in fact, when he died, there was a real concern that the Dow Jones average would be affected, because he had very large holdings in the largest railroad in the country, and also in General Electric. He was one of the largest shareholders. So if both of those were sold off by the family, that would flood the market with shares, and it would really cause a crash, which happened anyway. But so it's interesting, Fred could move the market, his death. And there are very few people, if you die, the stock market takes notice and gets nervous. But anyway, so this large development, he died, and so it was put in a trust. It was Frederick F.L. Ames Real Estate Trust, which built the Colonial Theater in the time also, which is still in good form. And eventually, they sold the land for $5 million to George Eastman. So that's another famous person that the family came in contact and dealt with, George Eastman. And he donated the land to MIT. And what you see now was part of Fred's plan, was the MIT campus. That's where this big development would be. Gosh, what else was I going to say here? But, oh yeah, when you go across the Mass Avenue Bridge, okay, towards MIT, it's Massachusetts Avenue, you take a right and you go over the bridge with the smoots and everything. If you look up to the left, as you're on the bridge, on the corner of Memorial Drive and Mass Ave, is this sort of Tudor-looking building. It has a sort of a battlement or a crenellated roof line, and that was the only building that was built of that development. And MIT now has its headquarters on Ames Street, and that was the first street in that. They went A, B, C, D, E, just like, in the Back Bay goes Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth. So, yeah, he was, go big or go home, basically. And so he died with it, and there was it was a very lot of strain. The Union Pacific was in big trouble, and he died. Well, he died on a what was it? A steamship line, Fall River Steamship Line. He was the treasurer and probably a major owner of that too. On the trip to New York, and in those days, you could leave your office, get a train in South Station, go down to Fall River. Get on the boat, have dinner, go to sleep, and at 8 o'clock, you were at the foot of Wall Street. You hadn't missed a day's work. It was great. So he did not get off the boat, and so they found him that he had died in his stateroom, and he died basically of a stroke, which his mother and his sister also died of stroke. So that was a family affliction. And, well, basically, what you see around here has a lot to do with Fred. You see the old photos, as you guys know, it was a very different Easton. It was you had a house here, you had another one there. Everything was not sort of smoothed out as it is now. So he introduced the good architecture and more sort of urban planning. And with the level of the craftsmen like Lafarge, like Olmsted, St. Gaudens, all these people who were well known. It really turned, I think of Easton, it's got, an industrial mill village bones, but it really has an American Renaissance overlay to it, which, as you know, really distinguishes this town from its neighbors. I mean, would you call Brockton an American Renaissance town? No, not really. But anyway, I shouldn't take a shot at our neighbors.
No.
But anyway, I don't want to leave on a note like that. But he was a very interesting guy. I really don't know that much about him. So I'm going to do more research because he had very extensive business holdings. It took 10 years to settle his estate because he used a lot of leverage in his deals. And so how do you protect the assets, whatever, and come out? So, but he had two very good people that did that. And of course, there's Langwater House. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's still there. My cousins own it, keeping it in the family. It's not going to condos or anything. So I'm very pleased about that they're able to keep it. But anyway, I hope you found this interesting. And again, with Fred, you do sort of get a lot of facts. You start to rattle off. I wish I knew some family stories about him. Oh, I know one. He was at the town meeting, Easton town meeting, and he offered to pay for half of the new waterworks that were going to be put in, you know. And then someone my father said, a local orator got up and said, well, what's in it for Fred Ames? And Fred got up and said, I'll not say what's in it for it. You're going to pay for all of it now. He sat it down. So that was great. So anyway, yeah, he was obviously very philanthropic minded, and he probably took that as a pretty good insult to him. So, but anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm not the best speaker. I write better, and which is not saying much, but from the first to admit it. But there's also some interesting stories on his son and grandson as well. And you've got to read about Freddie. He's a very interesting guy. And when he died, it was really too bad because he was interested in commercial aviation, which was just taking, I hate to say that, just taking off. And he had the connection. He knew the Wright brothers. I mean, that's another name to put on that list of people. And who was it? Glenn Curtis, he was another one, they would know that. And he had a delivery service, air service to New York. He loved to fly. He had plenty of dough behind him. It would be perfect for him. You know, he found it. He'd stopped being a playboy adventurer. And so that was really tragic. You know, he was snuffed out just as he was, as they say, getting his act together, and he was at the right place at the right time. So, and he was a great sailor too, an ocean racer. And I have some great quotes from writers about what did he do? He went over with his college friends. He had an Alden schooner, sort of a Gloucester fisherman type, very, very sturdy boat, seaworthy boat. So he sailed, I think they had one professional crew with them. And where was it? This was 1925, 26. You know, this is before Lindbergh had flown across the ocean. And they entered this second time that they had this. It's called the, oh God, what is it called? It's the race where they go out around the lighthouse and come back in Ireland. And he entered that now. I mean, there's been as many today. It still goes on as many as 300 boats racing in it. And he had a boat that was really a heavy weather sailing boat. And he sort of got way behind in the beginning. But what happened, Fastnet, that's the name of it, the Fastnet race. So finally, the wind, they were praying for dirty weather, and finally they got this incredible squall, and it's very well written here, and they just rode it till the mast practically snapped off. And they came in second on corrected time, because that's like allotted for the size of the boat. Obviously the bigger boats go faster. And they came within 10 minutes of winning. I mean, these were college kids, went over there. It was the British racing establishment who had boats with all professional crew. So he's really someone to read about, and it's just too bad. And maybe I was named after him. All right. Well, thank you for listening. All right.
Thank you, Fred. Just a little bit of an anecdote to kind of go along with what Fred has just described to you. This building was built by FL for a cost of approximately $19,000. The building was repurchased from the railroad in 1969 in October for $14,500. Plaque right up there underneath the set of trains will give you the names of the Ames family members who were involved. And they repurchased it, as I said, for $14,500. And in November of 1969, Abraham Brooks, an attorney here in town, on behalf of the Ames and Parker families, took a walk over to Hazel Varela's house, maybe drove, knocked on the door where an historical society meeting was being held, spoke to Hazel and said, the Ames family and the Parker family would like you to have the keys to the railroad station so that you can have a headquarters for the Easton Historical Society. Subsequently, we become a museum as well. I think that's pretty important in the sense overall. And if FL Ames hadn't financed and built and had a need for this railroad station, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
We'd be in your house.
Right. That's true. Except everybody'd be clustered on the porch and everybody'd be a little cold. The other thing I wanted to mention, just as kind of an adjunct to Fred's, is that Jay Gould was the original Wolf of Wall Street. And Fred was absolutely right. You know, he had a bad reputation because he was smarter than everybody else. He beat everybody else to the punch. And in addition to working with FL Ames, he and one of his partners were bought and sold the Erie Railroad somewhere in the vicinity, depending on who you believe, of about 6 times. And sold stock in that railroad maybe 7 times, not sure. But he was the original Wolf of Wall Street. So once again, Fred, where'd you go? There you are. You're hiding. I got you.
I'm hiding again behind Jones.
Yes. Joan's nickname now is Camouflage.
That's right, you barely see her.
But thank you very much again. And also, as I had said earlier,
Thank you, Ben.
out on the case out there, there are 2 volumes of reminiscences. One, volume 9, has quite a bit of information, and the article which Fred authored and researched on FL Ames, Frederick Lothrop Ames, who was the builder of Stonehill, and his first cousin,
Freddie, once removed.
Freddie, once removed. I want to make sure I get the once right. Who was the aviator and went down. So, John, you want to say something?
Yeah, just,
Sure.
while my friend is here, and thank you so much for doing everything, but there might be people here that would like to maybe, he's quite a historian, especially his family. He knows his family pretty well, as you have heard. But if anybody has maybe questions, if you wouldn't mind fielding a couple questions about the Ames family, go ahead.
So I'm very new to Easton, moved here last year.
Welcome.
Thank you, and enjoying it very much, lovely town. Amazed by the Ames family history, but very confused. I would love to see a family tree sometime. Is there one available somewhere?
They've got one, I think.
There's one. If you
Well,
go
for a
in-
very nominal $10 fee, we have one in that little chart right there. Do you see those?
Excuse me, I'm
Ames
gonna
family tree is right
overrun
there.
the sales department here for a moment. But there is a family tree in the other side, at the far end on the governor's desk, that you can look at. It's the same family tree that
That might help me.
Vanna White II
This one's
is
better.
now holding up.
Well, I tell you what's very interesting is that we don't consider ourselves an old family in Easton. You know, we were like early 1800s, and we weren't like the Briggses and the Randalls and all that. We're like the late 1600s. So you say you're sort of new to the town. Well, I don't think we exactly feel that way, but we know we're latecomers. We're like the 2nd or 3rd generation. So.
That was printed in Yankee magazine about 25 years ago. I have a copy of it at home. If you can look up the issue of Yankee, I don't have the exact date, that appears in the magazine.
November 1991.
Anyone? Very good.
Thank you.
But who's counting?
No. I was in graduate school, and suddenly in my room there was this knock on the door. Fred, you gotta see this. You weren't lying.
And again, we have them right over here, too.
The sales department is now back.
I have a question. It's not about the Ames family, but I noticed, as a relative newcomer to Easton, that on commercial maps, Langwater Pond is called Longwater Pond. Now, I assume that the people at Arrow or whoever thought that Langwater was a typo, but I wonder if there has been any effort to get that corrected.
Personally, I have not seen that. I have to guess that it is a typo. It's definitely a typo.
I think there's a very ironic point to that naming, was Fred called it Langwater, did all that, but everybody called it Fred's Pond.
Right.
Nobody called it Langwater.
Right.
And what was it before it was Langmore?
Stones.
Stones.
Stones Pond?
Pond, yeah,
Yeah.
two, yeah.
Mr. Stone? A lot of that property. Any questions, for Fred? I don't want to hold him up, but
It's Sunday, so I ain't going anywhere. It's not fun.
What, you're not playing in the game this afternoon?
Yeah, I took a bye.
Anybody have any general questions that they'd like to have answered? No? Come on, you've got everybody except me that's a resource.
I have
Oh,
questions.
God.
Don't start.
Okay.
I think I just learned from Ann's newsletter that there were houses over here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I never knew that.
Across the
Right.
street here,
Yeah.
that was called the Ramcat area. There were worker housing. It ran all along that mound you see directly across the street,
Yeah.
all the way up to Pond Street.
Now, have we ever found out what ramcat means?
you don't want.
Excuse me, but
I want to
censored.
know.
Actually, it was derived from the machinery. In the
Okay.
shuttle shop, one of the machines. I'm not exactly sure.
And Fred, didn't the island have tenant houses too?
Yes, that
Yes,
was,
they
that
did.
was where they put the Swedes.
Yeah.
They did because they
That
wanted
helps
to
Priscilla Almquist.
Yeah, she's Swedish, but they wanted to separate the new Swedes from the Irish because the Irish tended to be more sort of, I'm sorry, John, tended to be more sort of,
Outgoing. Boisterous.
well, let me continue. More sort of, they wanted to have them not, I mean, it's very hard to describe it, but the Irish were the first to strike. And so when the Swedes came in, it was sort of, you know, buffer the labor force. And they first, turn around. Yeah, so it really was. They were fresh off the boat. They put them on the island and just keep them away from the labor people. There was a strike, and there were 4 Irish guys who were fired, and they all got hired to work on the places.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that strike lasted all of about 36 or 48 hours.
Yeah, but these guys, you know, the family hired them to work elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they were all, it was, you know, those guys were really tough. That Eames family, they were really tough. You
Bloodsuckers.
went on strike, and 36 hours later, you were rehired.
Yeah, that's hard.
There's a great article by a Stonehill professor, James Keneally, on that strike. I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember the title of it, but I'm sure you could research it under Professor James Keneally. He was the head of the Stonehill History Department, and he wrote, it's only about a 4.5-page article, but it's really, really good. And I read it a number of years ago. But the thing that struck me the most was that the strike and the aftermath lasted for about 48 hours. It was like, okay, so much for the labor uprising and so much for management crushing the labor uprising. Let's go back to work and sure we'll get this done. So it's probably one of those incidents in labor history that doesn't get played up enough. So anybody else?
Here, just
Yes.
when did the houses get torn down on Ramcat?
1930,
So
it was
1930, it was the big auction.
Oh, okay.
They were sold.
Yeah.
They were sold off. Some of them were moved.
And I think Aunt Minnie tore down a
Yeah, she
number of
tore-
them, right?
yeah, I was
I
about
think
to
I
say.
read that here, I got,
A big block of
That's
it.
correct.
yeah.
Was
It wanted
that,
a nice view.
was that an early form of urban renewal?
I'm not sure it would be characterized as such, but you could probably look at it that way.
Yeah.
You know, it was all there and.
Suburban renewal.
Suburban renewal, there you go.
Yeah.
I think my recollection, and having read some things about it, was that Minnie, who was the owner of the town offices now, she thought it was somewhat of an eyesore. So when they had the auction, she bought it.
Well, and there was less need for worker housing because they're more integrated in Americans, all that with the,
Exactly.
you know, and they moved on and bought their own houses elsewhere.
Well, that's right. And some of these houses right along here, if you look at the yellow house and the blue house over there, that was originally one building. So when you had the fire on the island and they moved the operations over, while they were building the industrial complex over here of stone, for fire reasons, they ran the factory right over here, if you look at the yellow house and the blue house.
And
going
the
right up
two,
street,
and the white houses too.
And the
across
two white,
railroad
yes, the
tracks,
two
too.
white houses.
Yeah.
Those were connected, and I don't know if the other two white houses were connected or not,
Maybe
but
they were
they may have
separate
been.
building or something,
Yeah,
yeah.
so, and then, of course, the Ramcat was the worker housing. Some of those houses were moved to different parts of town. I can't give you the exact locations, but that's the history of it, that they were bought, moved, and as you said, your Aunt Minnie said, we're making this beautiful.
Got it.
Ann, did you have something to say? I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say the same thing, that Mary Ames Frothingham
Yeah.
had anything that was left torn down so that it would look more attractive. And
Yes.
that was in 1930, at the time of the auction.
And that, by the way, was the time that Louis Frothingham passed away the year before, a couple years before, where Mary was building Frothingham Park.
Yeah.
So this was in the summer of 1930, they dedicated the park that September. So this whole piece, because I asked the same question, where'd they all go? Well, not every house was torn down. Many had a block right about here, but we have a gentleman that was in your class, Bob Silva, actually lived down here.
That's right.
One of the end houses that was still there, they didn't sell them all, but then they eventually all kind of left the area. But Bob reminded me that he lived right down there on this ranch. He wanted to know where the Ramcat name came from as well.
Yeah,
Well, there, you can still see the curb cut. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
walk down on the other side down there where, the road to go in where some of the buildings were. Yeah.
Yeah, the Silva family, Tony and Hilda Silva, maybe some of you know them. Yes, ma'am?
What's the island?
The island? The island was the original location on the opposite side of the pond, the original location of the factory.
Now, you probably want to know why it's called the island. Glad you asked. It's been called the island since in the 1800s, and that's was the first shovel works that the Ames family ever owned was there. They bought it from someone who was a Leonard, big name in manufacturing back then, and it was called the island, and they bought it for the water power, and it had two streams, one on the south side, one on the north side, and there was a pond on the west side and the east side, so it was sort of a square, quote unquote, surrounded by water, two streams, two ponds. So that's why it's called the island.
I think I see some of the streams still there.
Yeah.
Small stream.
Yeah, one's left, it's sort of an overflow, yeah, so, but that was the first shovel company building was over there.
So was this man-made?
Excuse me?
Was this man-made to make it a pond?
Oh, well, it was improved.
Yeah.
No, it was kind of swampy, and I think they did do a little dredging. Yeah.
Didn't John Ames, the original one, start in West Bridgewater making shovels?
Yes, he was the first one that made shovels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I've got something on the phone I can show you.
Okay.
It's great.
Hey, John's got a question. Can you
Yeah.
guys knock it off for me?
No, it's
More of a comment,
very
in
funny.
defense of Freddie,
Yeah,
who died in this plane crash in Randolph, and he had this Playboy image, and I defend that. He was quite an aviation visionary. It was called Ames Airways at Stonehill, but he also was working with Glenn Curtis and the New Haven Railroad together. Now, Curtis blew up and became a huge company, and they were together with the New Haven Railroad, were going to form an airline. And if he hadn't died,
Yeah.
because he was the catalyst for this whole thing, he brought Curtis built aircraft engines and became the Wright brothers, and it was called Curtis Wright, and those engines were on B-29 bombers in World War II, et cetera, et
Okay.
cetera. So this is the direction that Fred would have gone in.
he was right on the precipice of a big career.
Absolutely.
Big success.
And the New Haven Railroad would have gone into the airline business. In fact, Northeast Airlines was originally a railroad, and it was started, as a railroad, and then I'm not sure if my mind is rusty on that, but I think B&M had a connection with Northeast
To
Airlines.
Boston and Maine?
Yeah, so it was all, again, the big picture of transportation.
Yes.
Going from, because the railroads figured someday people are going to be flying and they're not going to be taking trains, and of course that's what happened.
The evolution of transportation.
So Fred really was a visionary, aviation visionary.
He had a
And-
good
and-
time, too.
Yes, yeah, let's not forget, he did have a good time, and let's not hold that against him.
You're so young.
On Stonehill's campus.
So young when he died.
39?
Was he 27?
No, it's 26.
Well, it was
On Stonehill's campus,
1890.
at the lower part of the campus, if you're going down Route 123, that portion of the campus which is on your left-hand side, there was actually an aircraft hangar, excuse me, a landing strip, and it was called at one point the Ames Flying Club.
Well, the country club of the air.
That's true.
It was.
Wow.
Wasn't really 27.
So yeah, if you're over at at Stonehill, and you're over at, look in the archives, you can see photographs of those existing buildings, i.e. the hangar, the landing strip, etc.
It's the athletic fields, and that's why they're the Skyhawks.
No, that's not why they're the Skyhawks. but-
Why are they the Skyhawks? Because it has a propeller.
Well, I know it does.
Okay, get yourself out of this one. What?
There was a marketing company.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the background since I happen to have been involved in it. The school was concerned at the time because the nickname or the logo was the Chieftains. And there had been, under NCAA auspices, a fair amount of dispute considering considering chieftains, among many things like redskin and other labels, as insulting to indigenous people. And the NCAA was taking great offense at this, and in fact, I'm trying to remember, is it Florida State that's the Seminoles?
Yep.
Yeah. The Seminole tribes got a little annoyed at the NCAA's because they said, we like having the name Seminoles for Florida State's athletic teams. But be that as it may, the athletic director and the then president decided that they were going to be preemptive, and talked to the Board of Trustees about it, and they decided that they were going to change from chieftains, which, you could have a Scottish chieftain too, or an Irish chieftain. These were arguments that were all made, to something else. And they brought in a marketing company to give them some ideas and some thoughts and so forth. I don't think it was ever expressly stated with regard to the Ames, Freddie Ames's flying and so forth, but it certainly could have been taken into consideration. And I do remember one of the trustees, who was a fellow by the name of Lou Gorman, and Lou Gorman at one point in time was the general manager of the Boston Red Sox, as many of you may know. Lou was on the Board of Trustees, and when presented with one of these options, many of these options, one of which was the Skyhawks, Lou was heard to exclaim, "What the expletive deleted is a Skyhawk?" For that, he's been enshrined at the sports complex, the Sally Blair Sports Complex. But it wasn't specifically, but it could very well have been part
Yeah, because they
of
play
the
on
process.
they play on the landing strips, right?
Yeah. All of the sports fields had already been built down on what was the landing strip.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but most baseball fields, soccer, etc. Not the football field, which is up first.
Sure.
Yep. Yes, Steve.
When did that occur? The name can't change?
Let me think for a minute. Father John Denning's been president now for 11 years. So 11 years, probably about 15 years ago, max, thereabouts. And it was really interesting because I was involved at Stonehill in fundraising at the time, and the majority of the alumni who had graduated from Stonehill had all graduated as chieftains. So maybe about a quarter of the alumni at that time. And my thought at the time was, let's see, I'm getting a lot of feedback here from the alums. Do we really want to alienate about 3/4 of our alumni when we have a capital campaign going on and we're trying to raise some money? It didn't hold any water on the argument, because they went ahead and did it anyway. Yes, Tom?
I was talking to an alum, in fact, I think she was on the board of Alumni Association or something. At the time, they were changing to the Skyhawks.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little hot under the collar when she told me the reason why. She said, and I'm quoting from her, that Fred Ames was killed flying a Cessna Skyhawk. And I said, no, he wasn't. Fred Ames was killed flying a Cessna airplane. The Cessna Skyhawk wasn't introduced until 1957. It's called the Cessna 172, and they gave it the name Skyhawk. Fred Ames was killed, what, 1932?
Yeah, yeah.
And the Skyhawk came out in 1957, so you can't call them because...
Well,
Yeah,
it's kind of like everything else. There's lots of myths. And it's kind of like,
that was not a myth.
No. What I'm saying
That was
is,
in a meeting that the president of Stonehill made that statement that Fred Ames was killed in a Cessna
but that's what
Skyhawk.
I'm saying, Don. There are misconceptions. Maybe not a myth is not the right
Yeah.
word. There are misconceptions that are rampant.
Yeah.
And you can walk around the Stonehill campus and look at various spots and see misconceptions.
But you know what I think it is? It makes it sound so much more exciting than saying a marketing group came up.
You're absolutely right. But that's what
That's the
happens.
best answer I've
That's
heard
the
all
best
day.
answer.
All right. Yeah,
That's
You messed with
Go
the
ahead.
story enough.
So, anybody else have any other questions? Oops.
I got a
Yes, sir.
story, but anyway, go ahead.
Oops. Not you, Fred.
Well, I was just gonna say, just point of interest, because it keeps coming up slowly here and there, is I just finished reading two very good books. One was on Jay Gould, and then oddly enough, I got interested and read another book on E.H. Harriman. Both were basically peers. Harriman was a little bit younger than Gould, but everything took place in, like, from the 1850s into the very early 1900s. And it was interesting reading because all of the names that we all know of the top performers of that era kept coming back, whether they were railroad men, bankers, or whatever, the Morgans, the Ameses and whatnot, all the names kept coming back in the book. And oddly enough, both of those people were very much maligned, basically for everything they did. Now again, these are two books written by an individual that I read. I can't provide proof of anything he put in the book, but both of them seem to be like the fairest books that I've seen. Both of those people were much maligned over pure greed and jealousy of the rest of the population looking at them.
As I said, Jay Gould was considered to be the original Wolf of Wall Street, and he was smarter than everybody else.
Yeah.
I think you and I may have read the same book. I've read several books on
And
it.
Harriman was exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah.
He worked with Gould, not exclusively or as a partner, but just like he worked with Oliver Ames and
As an investor.
and J.P. Morgan as let's face it, they were the top players of that part of the century. But they were very much maligned for what they did. They did become very wealthy, but both of them had the innate, born-in insight to choose the right path the first time, almost every time. Now, maybe luck played a little bit with that, it probably did, but irregardless, they both could see the right way to move on something almost instantly, or with a little bit of background work. And the other thing I just wanted to add, not that it matters in this day and age, but both of them, both probably equally, were brought into court for lawsuits. They were brought before the Senate over and over and over and over to explain what they were doing because everyone thought they were robbing everyone blind. Both of those men actually did more for the country and the general population and the economy at the time than anyone else questioning them. Yes, they became wealthy in the process, that's part of the process. But as far as I know from reading these books, no one ever was able to lay a finger on them after all the hearings, all the court proceedings, and say, you were wrong, you did this, we're gonna fine you, sanction you, or put you in prison or anything else. It was just basically driven by jealousy and greed for two very smart people, and there was more than two at the time, who knew how to operate.
Excuse me, Fred?
Yeah, no, that is absolutely true. And there, Jay Gould was Jewish. He wasn't, he was a Methodist.
No, he wasn't.
That was the
He was not
level,
Jewish.
he was Methodist. Born in 1836, died 1892. Was it Maury Klein? He wrote a very good book on Gould. You
I'm not
get
sure.
Maury's. 'cause
That's the
it's
one I
good.
read, Fred.
Yeah, that is
Maury
good.
Klein's book.
But Fred, tied back as always, I remember in the obituaries, and he had obituaries in the St. Louis papers, Buffalo papers, Atlanta papers. It was national news when he died. What do they say? He didn't have as much money as Jay Gould, but he was a much nicer guy. So he never got caught up in that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And maybe he wasn't a big enough figure. I don't know. But
Well, there's a
That's
book
number
there.
one, you gotta go after number one.
There you go. There's a book called The Robber Barons. The author's last name is Joseph. It's an old book. And if you read through it, you'll see all of the names that we've discussed today. J.P. Morgan, Edison, Harriman, et cetera, all the way down, Jay Gould. But you know what? There's very little in the way of reference to the Ameses. And when you think about it, this may not be an accurate analogy, but I think it's pretty close. The Ames Shovel and Tool Company was the Cisco of the industrial age. What does Cisco do? Cisco provides routers, various connections. They're giving you all the underlying equipment to build, essentially, the internet, computer age, etc. What did the Ames Shovel and Tool Company do? It gave you all the tools to build the railroads, the Erie Canal, to supply the Union Army in the Civil War, etc., on and on and on. So it's kind of interesting that, in a sense, you're the bedrock of what's going on, or the foundation of what's going on, but you don't get as much publicity as everybody who's building the walls and the roof of the house. So, any other questions, or?
How was Easton chosen as a place for the Ames in the beginning?
Oh, it was chosen for the waterfowl, but Fred, you can answer better.
it was because of the island. No, seriously, that was where the first power wheel was. And I think Leonard might have had that in place anyway. He made nails, but he went bust and then he sold it. And they were in West Bridgewater and the son came over. And one little bit more is Oliver, okay, who's the guy that did all this. He had an older brother, David, who was 19 years older and made guns with his father, who was one of the gun makers for the Revolution, the people in Massachusetts. Anyway, he got the commission signed by George Washington to be the first federal superintendent of the Springfield Armory. Now, this was high tech. This was Eli Whitney. There was Colt, everybody out there. And old Oliver apprenticed for 5 years out there. He went around with his brother, the superintendent. So it wasn't like he was a blacksmith's son under the spreading chestnut tree. He was exposed to all those people like Whitney, Colt. It was really the cutting edge of what was technology then. And that was his education. But there's, you think of, well, he was a farm boy, that did horseshoes. But no, he was up to date on all the latest technology, had the connections with those people. So he came well equipped.
Rick, you had a question?
On a final note, I would just like to say, and I kept thinking about it while I'm in this train station, because this is quite a historic train station. 65 years ago, my younger brother here and his best friend Alan Gildersleeve came down here and boarded a train unbeknownst to our family. They were about 5, 6 years, 7 years old. They wanted to go to California to see Annette Funicello. They boarded a train. They got caught down in Lakeville, and the Lakeville police called my mother. She said, "He's what?"
How else was a 7-year-old kid gonna go to California? Train. You've been a musketeer ever since. I'll get you back.
That's great. And ladies and gentlemen, his musketeer ears are in the mix. Okay, so that's adding a little more flavor to the whole thing. Good, Rick, I like that.
Have something to eat,
Have
please.
something refreshment.